EA Sports WRC 24 Hard Chargers content pack is now available. It brings new stages, new cars, new liveries and new moments. But is it worth your time? Well, I'm going to answer these questions for what could possibly be the final DLC or additional content to the EA Sports WRC game, which is going on almost 2 years old at this point. So sit back, relax and strap in as I take you through all of the content available in what could possibly be the final content for this game. Starting off with the 6 brand new cars which make up this DLC pack, and we're going to start with the most powerful to begin with in the World Rally Car 2017 to 2021 category, and that's the Hyundai i20 Coupe WRC from 2021, which gives us now a total of 4 cars in this rather small category. We also have the Citroen C3 WRC from the Le Maestros DLC, the Ford Fiesta WRC and the Volkswagen Polo 2017, which make up this car class now. And in terms of the Hyundai, well, unfortunately it does feel a little rather uninspiring. It has a total of 3 liveries which are included, of course, from that season's WRC season, and unfortunately this does make up the total number of 18 liveries added with this DLC. Unfortunately though, in terms of the car itself, whilst it is incredibly powerful and there's no denying that, unfortunately it just doesn't feel any different from the cars that are already in the class. Whilst I absolutely cannot deny I had a blast driving this car, considering just how quick this thing is, and of course the rules and regulations of the cars of that time were once again incredibly fast, just like the Rally 1 machinery we see today. Unfortunately, because it is just so modern and you've probably driven it in recent WRC games, it just fails to stand out. And again, it feels incredibly similar to the rest of the cars in class. However, if you're a Hyundai fan, you'll probably absolutely love this thing, and I don't see why you wouldn't. Great to drive, but feels a little uninspiring for a paid DLC. The second car that we can see as part of this pack is in the World Rally Car 97 to 2011 category, and that is the Ford Focus WRC 1999. Now, to some, considering what I just said about the Hyundai, this might seem a little bit contradicting myself. However, this might just be my personal favourite car of the entire pack, and a lot of that is just down to pure nostalgia. Of course, if you look right next to it, we can see we have a very similar model in the form of the Ford Focus RS Rally 2001, and really there's not much difference between them. However, I always absolutely love the look of the WRC 99, including that pretty ridiculous little rear spoiler. And of course the car itself is the first of the Ford Focus driven by the late great Colin McRae. Now, in terms of the car itself, why do I love it so much? Well, it's very obvious probably, but I really love this generation of WRC car. I grew up around them, so for me I have a lot of nostalgia bias towards them, but in terms of how they drive inside of WRC, I think they feel fantastic. Overall, they're incredibly engaging, and whilst this car doesn't differ too much from the 2001 Focus, overall that's not necessarily a bad thing considering how good overall this class feels. So whilst to a lot of people it might be just kind of more of the same, I don't think that's a bad thing when it comes to the 97 to 2011 WRC car category. Overall, a fast, thrilling and very enjoyable car to drive. Rest in peace, Colin McRae. Rally 3 up next, and we actually have our second car in the category, and that is the Renault Clio Rally 3, which, as we can see, finally gives the Ford Fiesta Rally 3 a run for its money. Now, in terms of the car itself, it does feature 2 liveries, and once again, every livery, even on the new cars if it's default, does count towards them, which is a bit of a shame. But in terms of this car, well, I actually really like it. Now, of course, with this car being part of the Rally 3 category, it does have the same kind of rules and regulations as the Fiesta, so it does feel very similar. However, it might just be me, I do feel like this car right here has that little extra weighty feel, and I felt incredibly confident in the car to drive it on the ragged edge almost constantly. Now, of course, Rally 3 or WRC 3 is a limited category. It's an official one, so they can only really place the official cars in there, and the Renault not being in there for the longest time almost felt like a bit of a kick in the teeth. So it's great to see this category fleshed out, even if it is just one extra car, taking the total to 2 cars. Next up is the Rally 4 category, and we have a total of 2 cars added to this category as part of this DLC pack, and it feels very much a out with the old, in with the new situation. So the first of the 2 cars in this category is the Opel Corsa Rally 4, which pretty much replaces the Opel Adam Rally 4, which has been in the game since day one. And well, it's no different for our second car here either. That is the Renault Clio Rally 4, which pretty much replaces the very aged but always quirky Renault Twingo. So let's begin by talking about the Opel Corsa Rally 4, which I definitely feel is the more interesting of the 2 new additions to this category. Of course, it's a more modern Opel, pretty much replacing the Opel Adam, which is a 2013 model, and then there's this with the 2021 year. Now, in terms of the car itself, if you're not a fan of Rally 4 cars, which are typically front wheel drive, front engines and relatively low horsepower, then this car's going to do nothing to change your mind. However, in terms of the model itself, I think it's a much more interesting addition, and I really enjoyed my time with it. It's not going to give you too much in terms of thrills, and it's a relatively beginner friendly vehicle, but again, it's enjoyable enough. So whilst I certainly enjoyed the Opel Corsa, I cannot really say the same for the Renault Clio Rally 4, which is of course pretty much a replacement for the Renault Twingo, which is a 2011 model. Again, whilst that car is incredibly quirky and incredibly fun to drive, I cannot really say the same about the Clio 4. And I think the main reason for it is because in the same DLC pack, we do have the WRC free variant, which is of course 4-wheel drive, more powerful, and overall just a much more enjoyable car to drive. Unfortunately, after going from that thing to the Rally 4, which is front wheel drive and again less horsepower, it just felt like any chance of an enjoyable drive here was kind of out the window. I certainly feel if they'd split both the Clios between both the DLC packs, I'd have probably enjoyed this one a lot more. And to finish off all 6 of the new cars from this DLC pack, we're going to head over to the H2 rear wheel drive category, in which we can find our final car of the DLC pack, and that is the Ford Escort RS 1600 Mark I from 1972. Perhaps the most interesting car out of all 6 of these vehicles. It's a pretty incredible machine and absolutely legendary. Now, of course, in game we actually already have one of the classic Escorts, and that is the Ford Escort Mark II. But for me personally, I've always loved the look and charm of the Mark I. So for me, this is a great addition. Now, of course, it does have a few liveries alongside it. It has the Team SO 1973, and another rally winning livery is the Ford 1973 livery. So there is no denying this is probably the most unique car of this DLC pack, but what's it like to drive? Well, it's surprisingly difficult in probably the best way possible. These historic rally machines are definitely not for the faint-hearted, and I found that out the hard way. This thing was brutal from the get-go, but I found myself really enjoying this thing, and as the stages went on, I found myself adapting my driving style accordingly and getting the most out of the car, to the point where I felt incredibly comfortable, but not too comfortable to where the car couldn't throw me into a tree at any point in time. That's exactly what I wanted this car to do. It was incredible fun, and there's definitely a certain charm to it. Probably the most unique car of the DLC, and probably the one that most people really want to give a go. And well, for historic rally fans, you're certainly in for a treat with this one. Next up is the total of 12 new stages across both Sweden and Greece. Starting off then with Rally Sweden, in which we get 6 brand new stages. This will range from the 13th stage onwards until the end of the list. And you may notice here that they all look very similar. There's a few shorter variants of these stages, but overall they are very close to each other in terms of looks and feel. And then we have Rally Greece, which once again receives 6 new stages, and these are a lot longer and a lot more brutal. Of course, that's very typically Rally Greece fashion. However, in terms of the stages, they're probably not as tough as what we already had in game, but you'll still need 100% of your concentration to make it to the end of these things. So let's talk about Rally Sweden to begin with then. As I said, they are very similar. You're going to be repeating a lot of the same sectors over and over again, but that's very typical of EA WRC. it's nothing really new. However, in terms of the actual overall stage design, the high snow bankings and such, I feel like this really sets the foundation to what a Rally Sweden stage should be and should look like. For me, this screams much more Rally Sweden than the default Rally Sweden stages that we already had. And honestly, unlike the default Rally Sweden stages, I found myself wanting to come back to this over and over again. My favourite part, well, I think that's obvious, it's the tunnel section, which you can hit absolutely flat out, and flying over the jumps and bumps is probably one of the most thrilling parts of any WRC stage, period. Another highlight of the Rally Sweden stages is absolutely where we see the high banking properly on show, where we've got this almost rallycross-esque like finish to the main rally stage. You can go forwards and backwards here and you'll be going over it a lot, but each and every single time is an absolute blast. Lots of small bumps, you'll then pick up speed, go into another tight and technical section. It just feels amazing through here. So in conclusion, yes, the Rally Sweden stages are very, very repetitive, but I wouldn't say that's a bad thing because of just how good these stages are when combined together. The high banking is much more prominent now, something that I felt was really lacking from the original Rally Sweden. And in terms of the individual sections, the tunnel's an absolute blast. That final section is really tight and technical. Overall, this is a pretty fantastic WRC stage and might be one of my overall game favourites. Now, of course, I can't talk about the Rally Sweden stages without talking about the Rally Greece stages, and in typical Rally Greece fashion, these stages are absolutely brutal. However, I would say they are typically easier than what we saw in the base game. In the base game, I felt like every single version of a Rally Greece stage was almost always tight, technical, enclosed, and you wouldn't get up to really any speed whatsoever. However, here it feels much more open to the point where you're going to hit some pretty ridiculous top speeds. Now, of course, Rally Greece has always been that way. It's more of a survival rally than it is overall speed. You have to basically combine the two if you want to be the fastest in the world, and well, it is just a little bit different here. That doesn't mean that's entirely gone. Again, you can be on these incredibly fast and flowing sections, but still centimeters away from total failure. And of course, if you overdrive it, well, you're going to end up over a cliff, and well, that'll be your rally done and dusted. Now, truthfully, versus Rally Sweden, I don't feel like the Rally Greece stages have had the same amount of love poured into them. Again, the only thing that really feels different here is that it just feels like a Rally Greece stage, just a little bit quicker. There's not too much that stands out from what we've already seen at Rally Greece apart from that. And in going ahead and making these stages just a little bit quicker, I feel like a lot of the charm that was there from the original Rally Greece stages is kind of lost. I would say I probably prefer the base Rally Greece stages over what we're seeing here. Again, it does still contain some of that typical Rally Greece charm and brutality, but it definitely doesn't feel it's on the same level as what we already had in game. Alright, next up is typically one of my favourite parts of these DLC packs, and that is the liveries. Now, in terms of the liveries, there's 18 total, and the first car that gets a new livery is the Fiat 131 Bath Rally from 1976. Truthfully, I still prefer the default livery here, but we do get the Fiat 1976 livery. Now, in terms of the second car that gets a new livery, that is the Ford Escort Mark II. As we can see, we get the Ford 1979 livery, and I think personally, this might be my favourite over the default. I really like the blue colour on this one, and I actually really like the lighter blue wheels. We of course then get two for the Mark I Escort. We have the default and then the Ford 1973 livery, which personally for me, I think is the nicer of the two. Although honestly, both of these liveries very fitting for this car. Next up, probably one of my personal favourites out of the entirety of this pack is for the Ford Escort RS Cosworth, and we get the Wilson 1993 livery, more commonly known as the Michelin Pilot livery. That stunning bright yellow and blue mixed together to make one of the most iconic liveries to ever exist on the Escort RS Cosworth. So for me, this was a must, and it's finally here. Next up, we have the Ford RS Rally 2008, which gets two liveries in this pack. So the first livery we get is perhaps my favourite of the two, and probably one of my favourite ones in the pack. That is the Wilson 2010 livery, or more commonly known as the Eddie Stobart livery. I absolutely love this thing in real life, and I think it looks incredible in game. Now the second one is one of two Gronholm liveries, and this is the Gronholm 2006 livery, again plastered in BP Ultimate and Castrol sponsorship. I think most people will probably know this one and want to use this one. Then of course we have the livery for the Focus WRC 99, which is the Martini livery without the Martini sponsorship for very obvious reasons. Again, absolutely iconic, that one. And then we have probably the worst one of the bunch because it takes up 3 spots in the 18 total liveries, and that is the Hyundai 2021 livery, which again just features the official liveries from that season, and they're all pretty much exactly the same apart from a flag and a driver number. Then of course we have the Opel Corsa Rally 4 livery. This is the launch livery from 2022. There's not much to say about this one. It is just the launch livery finally put in game. And in terms of one of my favourite liveries of all time, finally making it into WRC, and I don't feel it's talked about enough, is the 206 Rally livery, and it is the second Gronholm livery we have as part of this pack. That is the Gronholm 1999 SO Peugeot livery. This thing for me is absolutely iconic, and I think more so because it heavily featured in the likes of Gran Turismo 3 all the way back in 2001, and it's always stuck in my mind, and I don't feel it gets enough love. Next up we have the Peugeot 208 T16 R5, which gets a very nice livery, of course celebrating the late great Craig Breen's junior WRC career. This is the Breen 2015 livery. Again, I think it's a massive step up compared to the default, but it's probably not the most eye-popping one of the bunch, but again, it is nice to see this included. Rest in peace, Craig. Next up, we have the Clio Rally 3. Now, this gets 2 livery options. The first is the test livery, which it is set to by default, but we do have an official 2024 livery here with the Renault Recommends Castrol type livery, which I think is very nice. In terms of the next one, we have the Clio Rally 4 and its default launch livery. So again, not much I can really say about this one. No other changes to the car. And another one of my favorites from this pack is the Seat Corboda, which of course, as you can see, gets the Privateer 2001 livery, which I think looks incredible. Maybe not as standout as the default livery, but again, still very nice. And of course, finally, I cannot talk about the DLC without talking about the moments. One of my personal favorite features in the entirety of EA Sports WRC. Hard chargers, well, it sits in its own category. As we can see, the first one we have is Hairpin, which is fictional from the 1990s, 3.9 miles, one stage for the Ford Focus WRC 1999. Now in terms of the second one, another fictional one here from the 2020s, 4.8 miles, one single stage called Torque Steer, featuring the Clio Rally 4. We then have Kiwi Soil, which is an inspired one, of course featuring the Ford Escort Mark II. Then we have one of the longer ones here, featuring the Opel Corsa Rally 4, which is a fictional one from the 2020s called Sending It. We then move over to Rally Greece with Jack of All Trades, which is an inspired one from the 2020s, featuring the Hyundai i20 Coupe WRC from 2021. Again, another single stage one here. We then have Iceman from the 2010s. This is the Ford Focus RS Rally 2008, of course in the Gronholm livery. We then have the Peugeot 208 T16 R5 in Monty Madness. Another inspired one, of course, for Craig Breen. We then have M Sport Pilot, which is inspired from the 1990s. This is the Ford Escort RS Cosworth at Chile. Then we have Iberia, again another inspired one featuring the i20 Coupe WRC 2021. In terms of the next one, once again Iberia, exact same car, this time called Race Trim, once again inspired. Then we have Safari Rally Kenya, featuring the Ford Escort RS 1600 Mark I, which is an inspired one from the 1970s. We are then going to stay with the Escort RS 1600 at Rally Finland for another inspired one in the 1970s called Home of Rally. We then move over to the Focus WRC 99 once again at Safari Kenya. That one is called Mechanical Symphony, a very quick but enjoyable one, that one. We then have Latest Formula, which is a fictional one, finally featuring the Renault Clio Rally 3. That is once again the Greece stages. We then move over to Rally Sweden, which is going to be Red Barn Armstrong, an inspired one from the 2020s featuring the Fiesta Rally 3. And then to finish off, we have Rally 3 Rivals, once again featuring the Clio Rally 3, pitting it up against the Ford. Now, in terms of the moments here, again, there's a lot of them, but in terms of how they differentiate themselves from the others, well, there's not much to differentiate them, honestly, apart from, you know, a couple of the new stages and, of course, showcasing the new cars. In terms of what you have to do, the goals you have to achieve, it's kind of more of the same, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, as I mentioned, it's one of my favourite features to EA WRC, and it continues to be enjoyable even in this DLC pack. Whilst I haven't played every single one of them so far, from the ones I have played, it is very much a mixed bag. Some of them are definitely more fun than others, which is to be expected. Some of them, though, are incredibly weak overall, especially when it comes to highlighting the new cars. I feel like it just doesn't do a good enough job of doing the best for that specific model. The main one is for the Escort RS, which I feel like being put at Rally Finland, whilst enjoyable, it feels much more at home on these very tight and twisty tracks. So for me, the Safari version of that moment with that car is much more enjoyable than Finland. Again, overall, whilst it is a mixed bag, it's still very enjoyable nonetheless. Although if you don't find yourself wanting to binge moments, then honestly this is going to do nothing to change your mind. So is this the end for EA Sports WRC? Of course, at the moment there's no more scheduled DLC that is coming up for this game, and this was the final pack, which was part of the 2024 season expansion. And well, could it possibly be one final hurrah for the game? Well, I really hope not. One thing I actually really liked about EA WRC was the fact that they didn't go for that yearly release. Of course, the WRC doesn't necessarily get the major updates from season to season that we see with other series. So in fact, going and releasing expansion passes for the following season was the much better option than a full-blown annual release. And I think it's actually done better for the game. Now, of course, yes, it still suffers from some of those performance issues, but they're nowhere near as bad as it was on launch. And I think they've done a grand job in terms of actually updating the game into a much more playable overall game. And of course, with the 2024 season expansion and the last few DLC packs, it's a much more fleshed out title. Now, for me personally, I don't necessarily think it's up there with staples of the rally genre, of course, Richard Byrne rallies and Dirt Rally 2.0, but I feel like it is kind of almost there. It feels like a much more fleshed out rallying title, and I feel like, again, skipping the annual release thing makes it a much better, more fleshed out overall product than what we saw when it was on a yearly release, and really not too much actually changed. As for the Hard Chargers pack, do I think this is a fitting way to actually say goodbye to this game if there's going to be no more DLC? Unfortunately not. Again, all of these cars and such are not available as part of your career mode, which is one of the best things about this game. They're very limited in where you can use them, and it was the same with the Le Maestros DLC. So if we see that change, then possibly yes. But in terms of the game overall, if you fancy yourself a bit of rallying, I would say now is the best time to pick it up. What with the 2023 season stuff, pick up the 2024 pass, and of course the Le Maestros and Hard Chargers DLC, and you've got yourself a very fully fleshed out rallying game here. Anyway, that's it from me. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Take care, guys. Peace.